Justin Gaethje just said something that should immediately reignite the entire conversation around this fight. He said he stopped Ilia Topuria twice. Not once, not at the end of round 4 when the corner threw in the towel, twice. His specific claim is that Topuria told the doctor he could not see, that he communicated to the referee that he was done, and that in Gaethje's reading of that exchange, his opponent had mentally checked out before his corner made it official. And then he went further. He said Topuria does not get a rematch. That he quit on the stool, that Gaethje stopped him twice, and that his next challenge cannot be the current champion. He told him to go fight Paddy Pimblett first. That is a champion talking with genuine edge rather than manufactured promotional tension, and the distinction matters because it changes how you have to read everything that comes next for both men. Gaethje earned the right to say exactly what he is saying. He walked into the White House as a 6-1 underdog against a man that nearly every credible analyst considered unbeatable at that moment, and he not only won the fight but did so in a way that has people describing it as one of the most devastating performances this weight class has seen in years. When you do that, you say what you want about the man you just beat. The floor is yours. But start with the psychology of the rematch refusal, because that is the most substantive and interesting part of what Gaethje actually said on the Joe Rogan Experience, and it goes considerably deeper than simple post-fight trash talk. His argument about expectations, about why Topuria lost in a way that goes beyond just the physical result, was the clearest and most honest competitive analysis delivered by anyone in this entire post-fight period. He said he told Topuria the exact truth before the fight. He warned him publicly, repeatedly, that when the fight reached rounds 2 and 3 and Topuria had not gotten the finish he was expecting, everything was going to unravel. And Topuria heard that warning and pushed harder in exactly the opposite direction, needing to prove Gaethje wrong rather than evaluating whether Gaethje might actually be right. That psychological mechanism, where a fighter's confidence curdles into stubbornness under pressure, is exactly what Gaethje said he was counting on. He wanted Topuria to double down on the prediction because doubling down on the prediction was the thing that would eventually break him. The specific framing Gaethje used was sharp. He said he told Topuria the brutal truth specifically because he knew it would push him further away from that truth rather than toward it. And that is exactly what happened. Topuria came out in round 1 trying to prove Gaethje wrong by force, rather than executing the patient, calculating, trap-setting approach that had made him a 2-division champion in the first place. The pursuit of the first-round knockout was not a product of Gaethje's defensive brilliance. It was a product of Topuria's own psychological need to make the prediction he had made publicly come true. And Gaethje identified that specific vulnerability weeks before the fight happened and built his entire game plan around exploiting it. The mental framework comparison Gaethje drew about himself is equally worth examining because it explains something unique about how he has maintained elite-level competitiveness across 5 losses in his career without any of those losses seeming to fundamentally diminish him. He said he has never gone into a fight with specific outcome expectations in the way Topuria clearly did. He goes in prepared for his body to perform, competitive and wanting to win, but without the specific mental architecture that collapses when a predicted outcome does not materialize quickly. He cannot be surprised the way Topuria was surprised because he never committed to a specific script for how the night was supposed to unfold. When the fight went past round 1 without a finish, Gaethje had an answer ready because he had not told himself there would not be a round 2. Topuria had essentially told himself the same thing for weeks leading up to the fight, and when round 2 arrived without the finish he had promised, he had to improvise in real time against a man who had specifically prepared to outlast exactly that scenario. The Tony Ferguson parallel Gaethje drew is the one that should genuinely concern everyone in Topuria's camp, and it deserves direct engagement rather than dismissal. Gaethje's argument is not that he physically broke Topuria's body or his confidence specifically. It is that he broke the perception other fighters will have of Topuria going forward. Before this fight, fighters looked at Topuria and factored his unbeaten record and his championship finishes into their own psychological preparation before they ever stepped into the cage with him. That is what Tyson had in his prime. What Anderson Silva had during his run. What Khabib had. A portion of every future opponent's competitive difficulty came from the psychological weight of facing someone who had never been stopped, never been seriously hurt, never been made to look anything less than dominant. Gaethje erased all of that in 4 rounds. The fighters who face Topuria from here on know exactly what he looks like when he is hurt, exhausted, fighting blind, and broken down. They have the blueprint now. Whether Topuria can overcome that specific shift in how opponents mentally prepare for him is the most important question his comeback faces, independent of his physical recovery. The body shot sequence and the subsequent ground exchange has now been addressed directly by Gaethje himself, and his analysis confirms what several external observers suspected in real time. He said Topuria hurting him with body shots was actually one of the main reasons he won the fight. The specific mechanism was counterintuitive but precise. Feeling that he was genuinely hurt and in danger in that moment made Topuria dump his entire remaining fuel reserve in an attempt to get the finish before the opportunity passed. Gaethje estimated that was probably the fourth or fifth body shot that truly landed cleanly, not the first, meaning Topuria had been sensing the damage accumulating for a while before Gaethje went down. When he did go down, Topuria made the read that Gaethje was significantly hurt and chose to pursue a submission rather than continuing the striking assault from the standing position. Gaethje was explicit. If Topuria had stood him back up and continued working the body and the head while he was still hurt, the fight likely ends right there. He said so directly. His body was breaking. His ribs were probably breaking. Trevor Whitman, sitting right next to him in the interview, agreed completely. It was the wrong tactical choice from Topuria's perspective. And Gaethje knew in real time that being taken to the ground was actually the safer option for him, even hurt, because it gave him time to recover while defending submissions rather than continuing to absorb strikes that might have ended the night immediately. What Gaethje said about his own bone density is the kind of claim that normally gets eye-rolled in these contexts but is harder to dismiss given the specific evidence his career provides. He said the UFC's medical staff have told him he has the hardest bones in the organization. That sounds like post-win bravado. But then you look at the actual footage of what his body has absorbed across an entire career of wars of attrition, the shots he has walked through, the damage he has endured without the kind of structural injuries that typically accumulate in fighters who compete the way he does, and the claim becomes harder to wave away entirely. His legs alone, the way he throws leg kicks repeatedly without the kind of shin and bone injuries that disable fighters who kick with comparable force, is genuinely unusual. Whether it is actually bone density or something else entirely, there is observable physical evidence that his body handles contact differently than most fighters at this level. Now turn to the thing that nobody is saying explicitly but that Gaethje essentially telegraphed in the Rogan interview, and that is where the most interesting future-oriented analysis actually lives. Joe Rogan asked him directly who he wants to fight next. Not Ilya, he was emphatic about that. Not Arman Tsarukyan, whom he acknowledged is the deserving challenger from a purely competitive standpoint. He said he does not have a name in mind. And that specific, deliberately vague non-answer from a man who had just been extremely direct and specific about nearly everything else in the interview is itself a kind of answer. He said he is not fighting for the rest of the year. He said Conor McGregor was confirmed around the same time to not be fighting again until April of next year under the terms of his UFC contract. He said on Ariel Helwani's show that if offered a title fight in his second UFC appearance, he would take it. Line those three facts up and one specific fight starts to emerge from the fog. Justin Gaethje versus Conor McGregor for the undisputed featherweight championship, contingent on McGregor beating Holloway in July. The competitive logic for making that fight over the Arman Tsarukyan rematch that Arman deserves on merit is uncomfortable but not difficult to understand. Gaethje himself made the point about equity, about the fact that his accomplishments and his commercial value deserve to be matched with opportunities and compensation that reflect that value rather than simply the next fighter up the rankings. A fight with Arman Tsarukyan is a genuinely dangerous competitive challenge that does not move the commercial needle at the level a fight with McGregor does. A fight with McGregor, particularly a McGregor who just returned from 6 years away and beat Max Holloway in a major pay-per-view main event, is one of the largest commercial opportunities available anywhere in the sport right now regardless of where McGregor currently sits on any competitive ranking. And from Gaethje's perspective, having done the genuinely historic thing he just did at the White House, the argument for matching that achievement with the sport's most commercially significant name rather than its most deserving contender is not an unreasonable one to make. The question of whether Topuria earns a rematch before any of that happens is, based on what Gaethje said, essentially answered already. He does not think so. His reasoning is specific. He stopped him twice, Topuria quit on the stool, and Topuria's next challenge needs to be rebuilding credibility rather than immediately stepping back into a title fight against the man who just exposed him. Whether that reading is harsh is a separate discussion. Whether it is commercially correct is almost certainly a matter for the UFC to resolve based on what the audience actually wants rather than what the competitive logic suggests. There is a real case that Topuria versus Gaethje too, given the circumstances of the first fight, the blindness, the orbital fractures, the corner stoppage rather than a referee decision, carries enough narrative fuel to be commercially viable even without Topuria needing to win an interim fight first. But that case has to be made to a champion who, at this specific moment, is not interested in hearing it. The broader point about what this loss will ultimately mean for Topuria's career trajectory is one that Gaethje addressed with genuine thoughtfulness rather than simple celebration. He said he does not know if Topuria will ever be quite the same fighter, drawing the specific parallel to Tony Ferguson and to the way the perception of a previously invincible fighter changes permanently once they have been taken apart publicly. But he also acknowledged immediately that Topuria is 29 years old, decades younger than Ferguson was when the same thing happened to him, and that the physical resilience available to a fighter at 29 compared to 36 is fundamentally different. He gave him the room, carefully, to potentially rebuild. But he did it in a way that made clear he was not expecting it to happen quickly or cleanly, and that he certainly was not going to be waiting around to find out. Arman Tsarukyan betting $1 million on Gaethje and winning approximately $5,700,000 from that position is the most entertaining subplot of the entire post-fight period. And Gaethje refusing to accept the truck Arman offered to buy him as a reward is somehow even more interesting, because the most obvious reading is that Gaethje knows Arman is the deserving next challenger and does not want to accept gifts from a man he may need to eventually beat. That competitive discipline, refusing a gesture of goodwill specifically because the man offering it might be your next opponent, is a small detail that says something meaningful about exactly the mindset that produced the performance he just delivered. Here is where everything actually lands after the Joe Rogan interview. Gaethje is the champion, talking with genuine confidence, refusing a rematch, declining the truck, and strongly implying he has already decided who his next title defense is against. Topuria is recovering with 2 fractured orbital bones, a broken nose, eyes still not fully opening, a 180-day suspension, and a champion publicly saying his next fight should be Paddy Pimblett. Arman Tsarukyan is the deserving contender who bet $1 million on the fight, won nearly $6 million, and still cannot get his truck accepted. And McGregor is 20 days away from fighting Max Holloway at welterweight, with the understanding that a win there potentially catapults him directly into a title fight that would be the single largest commercial event this sport has produced since the Khabib fight. The dominoes are lined up. Whether they actually fall in that specific sequence is the question that will define the lightweight division for the next 18 months.